Welcome to the Refurbishment Mastery podcast with me, Martin Rapley. If you're a property investor who is worried about paying too much for your next property, concerned that you don't know how to manage a refurb, or scared that you will be ripped off by a builder, then this is for you. In this podcast, I share over 30 years of experience of managing refurbishments and conversions to help you make more profit, save your time, and ultimately enjoy the process. On with the podcast. Welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. I'm going to do something a little bit different in this one, and hopefully something that I repeat in future ones going forwards. I'm going to go through some questions that have been raised by members of my community over the last few weeks. Now, members of my community join me every single week for about 90 minutes. It's an open forum. They can ask any question relating to refurbishment, development, conversions, relating to their properties, whether those are properties they're still in the process of buying, properties they're refurbishing, or indeed ongoing maintenance and management of properties. It's an open forum. They can ask me anything they like. And here are some of those questions. So the first one is, when converting a building into 4 flats, could you let me know about the services, please? And the services currently terminate to the boards and meters in the basement. So I'd need to route the electric and water to each flat and have meters installed. I'm guessing that I'll also need an electric boiler to each flat too. What would you budget to route and install meters, etc.? So this is a fairly common question. It's a fairly typical kind of thing to think about. And I have to say, it's one of those topics that a number of property investors actually misunderstand. And that is that when we've got a big building, let's say it's currently a commercial building and we're going to convert it into 4 flats. Maybe it's currently a house and we're going to convert it into 4 flats. And one of the phrases you may well have heard people use is the phrase splitting the services. We have to split the services. And I'm here to tell you that actually the phrase split the services is not a particularly good description of what you actually have to do. In reality, you never actually split the services. You end up bringing new services into a property and replumbing, rewiring the property to meet the new requirements. So just because you've got, let's say, a house with a service coming in, perhaps into the basement, as in this case, and you've got scope for putting a flat onto each individual floor, say, there's no likelihood whatsoever that the existing services in that building are of any use at all. There may be a few bits that could be of use, but your contractors that are doing the work, that are doing the conversion, would never really want to use any old services that are there. Electrics, it's highly unlikely that anything's actually going to be usable. You might be able to use the occasional bit of plumbing, but generally the tradesmen want to know that everything is new because they've got to guarantee the work that's being done. And they don't want to find that everything works apart from the one bit of pipe that they left in situ, and there turns out to be some kind of blockage in there or some kind of or leak or something like that. So by and large, we don't reconfigure the existing services. By and large, we strip everything out and then put in a brand new service for each that we want. So electric, water, possibly gas, although that's now becoming less likely. And we do that to every one of the individual units that we've got. So that's the first little thing that we have to consider, that it isn't manipulating, it isn't changing what we've got, it is actually putting in new services. Now, if we were going to rewire a 1-bedroom flat, it's hard to give prices because prices vary across the country. There's always things that cause properties to sometimes be easier to rewire, others to be harder. And of course, the more work you're doing to your property, the more exposed things are. So if you've got a property where you're not hacking off plaster, for instance, rewiring doesn't can cause a lot more damage that needs to be made good, as opposed to a property where you've already stripped everything back to bare brickwork, and timber stud partitions, in which case the wiring can go through, and then obviously the plastering gets picked up as part of the reinstatement later on. So rewiring a small flat, generally going to start £3,000 plus VAT. Whenever I quote prices, they'll always be plus VAT. In some easy, simple, cheaper places, you might get that down below £3,000. I don't think you'll get it down to 2,500 anywhere now, but you may get a few £100 off 3,000. A lot of places, it's going to be 3,500, and of course, in the expensive parts, it's going to creep up a bit more than that. And then as properties get bigger, of course, it goes up. A two-bedroom flat wouldn't be double the cost of a one-bedroom flat. We've still got the same infrastructure. We've still got the same distribution boards. We've only need a little bit of additional wiring. So that may only be another £150, £200 more for a second bedroom, say. Prices, so that's a basic wiring setup for a normal property. Prices for plumbing, for our water services, if we're just talking about running cold water into a unit, that could easily be done for less than £1,000. Of course, in connection with that, we then distribute that water around the flat. We then generally put in some kind of boiler, could be electric, could be a gas boiler. My previous figure for rewiring didn't include an electric boiler, so we need to consider a boiler as well. And it's often in connection with plumbing. We've quite often also got some heating to deal with as well. It doesn't really matter whether it's water heating and gas boilers or all electric. The cost is pretty much the same. The cost of installing electric is a little bit lower because it's that much easier to work with cables as opposed to pipes, but the products themselves are just a little bit more expensive at the moment. I think in due course they probably will drop, but at the moment they're just a little bit more expensive. So that cost, that's a much harder cost to budget, by the way, because there's a lot more variables in there. But again, that cost is going to probably start 3,500 at the low end. And in a lot of places, you might struggle to get that below £4,000 and then creeping up towards five, depending on the size. These are small flats, and of course, as properties get bigger, we can, we need to increase those figures, of course. Now, that's the basics of getting the infrastructure to those individual four flats. Of course, we've also got to consider the logistics of getting the services to the flats, which for small flats in an existing property, you don't need to add much onto those figures. But of course, if you're building a block of flats or you've got much more sizable flats, the cableways, the pipeways, the service risers, service cupboards and things, that can start to add on further cost as well. Then separate from all of that is the fact that we've got a current property with some services coming into them. An electric supply that at the moment serves the whole property, and a water supply that at the moment serves the whole property. And we now need to add in additional water and an additional electric. Now, if we've got one service coming in and we've got four flats, we as a minimum are going to need three more services. Although with the electrics, we may need a fourth service if we've got a communal staircase and entranceway. So normally the freeholder will pay the electrics for the communal staircase. That may well also include a door entry system and a fire alarm system as well. That all comes under the landlord, or so the freeholder's responsibility. So we would normally have an electric supply for that, and then an electric supply for each of the flats. So perhaps the existing incoming electric supply serves the freeholder's demise, and then we have four new services coming in for each of the new flats. Water, we don't very often have a freeholder's water supply. You might do if you've got gardens and you want to provide watering facilities, but generally we don't. So maybe you've got to bring in three new water supplies. So you don't take that existing meter and split it or anything. We generally use that for part of what we need. and we bring in new supplies. Now, pricing new supplies is very, very hard. You're working with your local utility providers. They have their own pricing structures. They know where their cables and pipes are. It's cheaper if it's in the pavement, more expensive if it's in the road, more expensive again if the road is a main road and they've got to have traffic management as far as traffic lights, more expensive again if it's in the pavement, the other side of the road, and they've now got to dig the whole street up. So you can see it's a real unknown thing. And of course, in some areas, there isn't even sufficient capacity right outside the property, and you've actually got to pay to get the capacity increased from further down the street. There are various bits of legislation about how much as a maximum you can pay. And again, that differs all around the country. So you could pay, a very rough rule of thumb is I would tend to budget £2,500 for a new service coming into your property, be that gas, water, electric. To be fair, gas, in my experience, is a little bit lower than that. Electric can also be a little bit lower. Gas can come down to nearer £1,500 in some places. Electric can just drop below 2,500, but sometimes water's a little bit more. So as an average, 2,500 is quite a good figure to work with. You start to get a few economies come in when you're bringing in more than one supply, but with more than one supply, your infrastructure starts to get a little bit bigger. So one weighs out the other, really. So if, for instance, you were bringing in 4 supplies, you're probably going to need a bigger supply coming in. You're going to need some bigger cables coming in. You're going to need a way of splitting that inside the property. So the cost of that pretty much outweighs the economies of the fact that you've got 4. So that's kind of some things to think about there when you're bringing in new services. The key thing is ignore the phrase splitting the services. There's no such thing. If you're buying a property that's already got 4 flats, but they're all under one service, the likelihood is you've got to replumb, rewire it all anyway. You might sometimes find that they're all on their own individual supplies, and they could even have little sub-meters somewhere. That means that you could replace those sub-meters with a new incoming main for each of those individual buildings. So it depends on the configuration as to which of those prices you need to factor in to your particular property. The next question I wanted to cover off, again, is a fairly typical question that comes up. And this one actually, did it include a link to a property that was on the open market? I don't need to show you that property. You can picture it. You've seen hundreds of these properties. They're rundown properties, things that are falling to pieces, pink bathroom suites, kitchens that have been wrecked. You've seen these kinds of properties. The question that came from it, this property appears to be run down. I'm interested in how I can negotiate the price. It needs a lot of renovation. And I can, trust me, if you saw the images, you'd know it needed a lot of renovation. I'm wondering which strategy would be best. BRR, which stands for buy, refurbish, refinance, HMO, or a flip. HMO houses a multiple occupation. Flips are when we're buying a property, we refurbish it and we sell it on. So we've got here, you can picture the scene, you can picture an image, you can picture some details on this one actually came through on Rightmove, but there's Zoopla and On the Market and other portals as well where you can find these properties. And the question is, how can I negotiate the price? It doesn't really matter what the price is. I want you to look at the mechanics of the question actually, because the member here is asking for guidance as to how to negotiate the price. And they're also asking for guidance as to what would be the best strategy. And what I really want to do is turn this whole question on its head and say, I can't really answer the second question, what is the best strategy? Because I really want to have a strategy in my mind early on and try and work to that kind of strategy. For instance, there's these 3 different strategies here, as listed, buy, refurbish, refinance, perhaps ignoring HMOs, but first, certainly flips lead to two different outcomes. If we're buying a property, we refurbish it to add some value and we refinance it, that financially looks very different from buying a property, refurbishing it, and selling it on, flipping it on later on. And let me just explain what the difference is here. If we buy a property and we refurbish it to add value and we flip that on, then we get our profit as a lump sum at the point we've sold the property. And if we were to find a property today, it can easily take 3 to 4 months to get that over the line to own it. And then it might take 2 months, let's say, to refurbish it, maybe more, depending on how far you're going. And then it can easily take another 4 months to sell it. Then what we're saying, for a property we find today, if we're going to flip it, we won't earn any money from that for what could be 10 to 12 months, depending on how that cycle goes. Now, if you're happy not earning anything from that project for 10 to 12 months, then maybe flips is something you want to consider. If, however, you need to be putting food on the table and you've got living expenses, then that is clearly not a strategy that's going to work for you unless you can get enormous volume going through and you can be refurbishing several properties at any one time so that these lumps of profit are coming to you on a regular basis. But a little tip for you here, that is not good for the stress levels. If you're getting to a point where the only way you can put food on the table as at a grassroots level is by selling properties that you've got to refurbish, you'll find that really, really stressful. The other option, of course, is we buy a property, we refurbish it, we refinance it, and when we refinance it, we get some money back out. That comes out a lot earlier than selling because, of course, the refinance after the refurbishment is that much quicker. So maybe you get some money back out after something that might only be 6 months or so instead of 10 to 12. So half the time, possibly, you get some of your money back out. And then you rent the property out. So the tenants are paying a rent. There should be a gap between the outgoings and the incoming, and therefore every single month you make a small amount of profit. So you get your profit in two goes. You get a lump of profit when you refinance, and you can go again with that, or you can live on that profit at that point. And then you also get a small amount of profit every single month. Of course, that small amount of profit every single month helps to put food on the table. Maybe not one property on its own, unless it's a good high-end HMO, but it will start to put food on the table. Now, so there's two very different strategies there. Consider how you want to earn your profit from your deals. I would suggest, if you're getting started, that if you've got another day job that pays you pays you on a regular basis, by all means consider both options, refurbishment and refinance, or flip. Both of them work. If you're looking at getting started in property and you haven't got a lot of savings, you haven't got a lot to get going with, and you need regular income, I would suggest that you look for smaller, simple projects where you can add some value, refinance, and get income going fairly quickly. So with that set, we're now discounting some properties because some properties may not work to rent out. It may not be the right area to rent out. It may not be the right type of property to rent out. It may be a better opportunity to flip. It may be that you don't want to manage tenants and flipping is your thing, in which case you perhaps need to consider where you're going to get your funds from to get you through those early flips to get you started. So we need to look at this from a slightly different perspective than we've got a rundown property. What shall we do with it? We need to have some idea as to how we want to earn money from it. Now, the next thing, of course, is you've got a rundown property, but what is your strategy? If you're going to hold this property and rent it out for the longer term, what is the best strategy for you? are you happy to deal with a slightly noisier business as far as managing HMO tenants? Are you happy that you might be renting this property to 6 tenants? There's therefore more tenants to deal with, more legislation to deal with as far as HMOs goes, more noise as far as HMOs goes, more churn generally than you'll get in a single let. Is that right for you? Maybe you want to go, you're thinking, well, you could run this property as serviced accommodation. Well, have you got the processes set up to manage this from a service accommodation perspective? Have you got the backup team? Have you got your cleaners, your housekeepers? Have you got handymen on standby for changeover days? Have you got a marketing arrangement set up? Have you got the portals? Are you connected with the portals that can get you guests for your property? Is that what you want to do? Do you want to immerse yourself in running that kind of business? Or do you want something that's a little bit quieter? Maybe you're quite happy managing tenants, but you only want to let to single tenants, single AST properties. Maybe you're looking for people that are on housing benefit, and you're wanting to work with a charity at the lower end of the market. Maybe you're looking to rent to homeowners. Perhaps you've got a little 2-bedroom house and you want to rent to young couples, young families, and things like that. So what's right for you to manage is the next thing, because it's all right converting a property into a nice HMO, but if you don't want to run HMOs, is that the right thing? Perhaps you do far better finding properties that work far better to be a single family house. So it could be, again, that the property that you found is not suitable for the strategy that you've got. And what you'll find is that estate agents whose job it is to sell properties on behalf of their clients, the vendors that they're working with, their job is to sell properties. And a lot of estate agents believe that if the property is run down, it is ideal for property investors. And it may well be. It may not be ideal for you. So do an element of brainstorming almost to work out what's right for you. And then from there, you'll start to get an idea as to what kind of properties you're looking for. For instance, if you decide that you want to manage HMOs, then not every area in every city or town is suitable to be converted into an HMO. Maybe the property that you've seen on Rightmove is absolutely ideal for use as an HMO, but it's in completely the wrong part of the town, and you wouldn't actually have any market for it. So it could be a really nice property to refurbish, but if it doesn't work for that end market, then it's not worth looking at. And if you want to earn a slightly higher cash flow from serviced accommodation, say, then there's no point in buying the property that doesn't work for that strategy. So don't buy properties for the strategy that you're not interested in, because it's not going to help you get going. It might be absolutely fine in the longer term. If you're well established and you've been managing properties for a while, you might be able to diversify. But in the early days, you really want to find a niche that works for you, a type of property that works, a type of project that works in a type of area that works, so that you are looking at the right kinds of properties. So with that in mind, we can now start looking for these rundown properties that are on the portals, and we see them all of the time. And so the next part of the question, which is the first part of the question, is how that's here that came in, is how can I negotiate the price? So if you find your ideal property in your ideal area to do your ideal strategy, how can you negotiate on the price? So prices vary all over the country. Let me just take a nice simple figure that works in everyone's head and everyone understands. Let's say that the property that we've got is advertised at £200,000. So we can buy the property that we want, and it ticks all of the boxes, and it's advertised for £200,000. How can we negotiate the price is the question. We want to ideally pay less than £200,000. And the answer I would give to this is you don't necessarily want to be negotiating the price from the basis that it's on the market for £200,000. How can I get it for less? Because it could be that the deal is absolutely brilliant for you, even if you pay £200,000 for the property as it's on the market for. It could be that even though it would be really nice to get a 10% discount, therefore getting £20,000 off, even if you bought it at £180,000, that is still the wrong price to be buying it at. So, what I would encourage you to do is come at this question from the opposite end. And the opposite end is very much, what is this property going to be worth when I come to refinance it or when I come to sell it? Because if we don't know what it's going to be worth, how can we possibly know how much we want to buy it for? If we take that end price and we say, when I've done all of this work to it, when I've freshened it all up and I've modernised it and I've made it right, it's going to be worth £230,000. We can then say, well, how much is it going to cost me to get it to worth £230,000? Well, I need to rewire it. It needs a new kitchen, a new bathroom. I'm going to paint it all out. I think if I took down that wall between the kitchen and the dining room, that would open that room up nicely. Could make that a really nice family room. That's going to add some value. And we work out all of that cost. And I'm going to need an architect to do some drawings. I'm going to need building control involved with it. And so all of my costs are going to come to £50,000. So it's worth £230,000 finished. The cost to get there is £50,000 of building work. I've got some costs of acquiring the property. I've got some costs of finance along the way. So that's another £10,000, let's say. So we get to an end value of 230. We take off £50,000 worth of building work. We take off £10,000 of ancillary costs, and we're now down to £170,000, I think that comes to. So at £170,000, this property breaks even. So we haven't negotiated at all. What we've established is that we can't actually pay more than £170,000 to break even. We haven't actually even made any profit at this point, and I'd question if it's worth putting in all that time and effort and not making any profit. So come at this question from the other way. Don't think about, I've got to negotiate this down. Come at this from, what is the most I can pay for this property and still ensure that I am going to add value. I'm going to be able to get it refinanced and get some money out, or I'm going to be able to sell it and make a profit. And unfortunately, I talk to far too many property investors who have bought a property, they've negotiated 10, 20% off the asking price, but unfortunately, they found out the hard way that they've still paid too much. There are properties on the open market that will be sold for more than they are truly worth to a property investor. But that doesn't necessarily mean that someone's overpaid for them. If someone else can buy that house, it's run down, it might not look particularly nice, but the family come round at the weekend and they've got a mate who's a painter, and dad's an electrician, they will tidy all of that up, and they don't care if they've paid a bit too much. They've probably got better finance in the first place because they're buying it on a private mortgage rather than buying it through a commercial buy-to-let mortgage, say. And ultimately, they don't need to make any profit. If they live there for the next 10, 15, 20 years and bring the family up, that property will by and large go up in value over that time. And if they've got their dream property in the right area, they don't care if they've spent too much money on that. So bear that in mind when you're looking at rundown properties on the portals, and be careful that you don't overspend on those properties by negotiating down from the asking price. Always calculate the maximum that you can actually afford to spend. Next question I'm going to cover off today. I have bought an 8-bedroom HMO with 8 en suites. Each ensuite has an electric shower. The showers aren't working correctly, and we thought it was faulty electric showers, but it turns out it's the water pressure. So the water pressure from Thames Water at the street is only 0.44 bar, which is very, very low. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. It then goes through a very thin pipe into the house, and the low pressure causes the showers to cut out when there's too much heat called for. So effectively, you can picture these electric showers. They're probably budget electric showers. I'm not, disrespecting the investor that's bought this because they're looking to improve the property, but it wouldn't be uncommon that these showers were actually of quite a low quality in the first place. The electric showers work effectively. You turn the shower on, and there's a heating element inside the box, not dissimilar from the heating element that's inside your kettle, although clearly it doesn't go anywhere near as hot as the one in your kettle would do. But the water passes over this heating element and the water heats up. But if there's insufficient pressure and insufficient water in the property, then insufficient water passes through. And to stop the element overheating, the shower will cut out. Just like if you turn your kitchen kettle on and you don't put any water in it, a lot of those will actually cut out because we don't want to burn out the element. So what we've possibly got here is a property with 8 showers. If one person uses a shower, it may well work perfectly all right. But if more than one uses the shower simultaneously, it would appear that there's insufficient water pressure to make these showers work properly. And the question I've got is, what is the solution? Should I be installing a water pump? Would this be enough for 8 showers? So, a couple of things to consider here is, if the water pressure is low coming into the property, then even if you fit a water pump in your property on its own, that won't make these showers work. Because if there's not enough water coming into the property, it doesn't matter how much you try and pump it around, there still isn't enough water coming in. You could have a storage tank somewhere so that the water comes in, sits in the storage tank, and then that could be pumped around, or indeed that could work through gravity to actually mean that there's more water pressure generally in the property. But it feels to me as though the place to start from is finding a solution to the problem of insufficient pressure through the building. And this could be in a couple of different places. It could be that the water is at low pressure out in the street, and that's what it says here on the message that came to me. Although the pressure quoted is way below the minimum standards that the water company should be providing. So I don't know if that's necessarily quite correct. So the first thing to do would be to talk to the local water supplier and get them to verify that there isn't some kind of defect, let's say at your meter, that there isn't a blockage at your meter that falls under their remit. They will confirm to you what the pressure is up to your meter and that the fault is not theirs. So that's a free test. The water board will come along and check that. Now, you could then have a problem from the meter into your house, assuming that most meters are now outside. Quite a lot often they're out in the pavement. There could be a problem between the meter and your house. Now, that is a service that is your responsibility. It could be that it's a very small pipe. It could be that it's an old lead pipe that's actually corroding up, and as a result of the corrosion, the bore of it is massively reduced, so it's just got too small to let volume of pipe through, in which case you're going to have to dig up that in your front garden and run a brand new pipe, or indeed you can leave the old pipe but just run a brand new pipe to connect it up. So that's another place. So you could get a plumber, after you know that you've got enough water coming into your meter and the meter's working properly, you could get a plumber to test the pressure where the supply comes into the pipe, into the house, because it could be that length of pipe between the between the meter and the front wall. That might be good. That might be bad. If it's bad, then we're talking about a new length of pipe, and you can get a plumber to do that for you. That might be quite good. So maybe it's good coming into the house. Maybe there's a valve just inside the house and the valve's not turned on properly, or it's seized, partially closed. A plumber will help you solve that as well. That could eliminate the problem we've got. The next thing could be that, oh, well, everything's good up to that point, in which case it's now not very good around the property. Now, the common thing to look at around the property, I would think it highly unlikely that this water system with 8 showers was designed to have 8 showers. There is a massive chance that this house has been modified over the years from perhaps a standard family house, and it's had all of these extra bathrooms put in. And there's a massive chance that now the pipes are just not run in a direct route. So if we've got good pressure downstairs, what we really want downstairs is potentially, at best, one pipe running to each shower. So we might have 8 pipes come from downstairs. We probably wouldn't get that's at best. We possibly would have them running in pairs or something like that. But we want to see some good direct pipes that go straight up the building to these particular 8 showers. And I bet that's not the case either. And that would suggest that you need more rewiring within the house, more replumbing within the house to improve the way that the whole lot's distributed. And then finally, the final thing to have a look at is what's the quality of the showers as well. If they are real cheap, bottom of the range, £90 ones, then to some extent you're getting what you pay for. A better shower will normally have, will work that little bit better. But ultimately, they do still need to have the good supplies to them. So the problem could be in a number of different places here. Do some research. Start with a free research. The free research is getting the water board along, and then you're going to have to bring in a plumber to do some investigation. And good plumbers will do this investigation for you, but they're going to charge, depending on how long it takes them to find the problems. They might have to open some areas up. They might have to open up some service ducts, lift up some floorboards to just try and work out where things are going. But you're going to pay for that on an hourly rate. And plumbers, depending on who you find, they're probably going to start that charge. There'll be a call-out charge and a cost on top of that. So you could easily spend, £200-300 with a plumber to do some investigation and help you understand what you've got there. So that was the third question I wanted to cover in this edition. And then the fourth one I would just want to cover off here. This is a little bit of a shorter question, but it's a bit more of a general question that will help you with other things. And so the question is, who can I go to get an independent assessment done on a flat roof who has no vested interest in finding problems? Someone who can tell me where the leaks are and what is the best way to fix it. So it's a really good question, and it doesn't just have to relate to flat roofs. It can relate to anything, because I'm sure some of you are thinking, yeah, I can understand the problem here. I don't want to bring out a roofer to give me advice on my roof, because a lot of roofers are going to say, oh, it's a disaster, it needs replacing, rip it all off, here's my really expensive quote. So if you want to get independent advice done on any part of a property that you are considering buying, or indeed a property that you already own where there's a defect like a leaking roof, and you want to know the best way of resolving it, the very best person you can go to for that advice, independent advice, is an RICS, that stands for Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, an RICS building surveyor. Now, be careful with the RICS. There's nothing wrong with the RICS at all. But be careful that there are lots of different branches of surveyors within the RICS. Some of them are valuers, valuation surveyors. Some of them are quantity surveyors. And we can go even further and we can be mineral surveyors and marine surveyors and all sorts of other specialists. What we want is a building surveyor. Now, building surveyors are trained to understand maintenance of building, repairs of buildings, and trained to look at the evidence of what is causing our problem. In this case, what is causing water to come through the roof. And they will give you fair assessment and indeed an anticipated budget for the works that are needed. So they'll tell you if it can be repaired with a local patch. They'll tell you how long that patch might last and what that cost might be. They'll also tell you if they believe it actually does genuinely need a full replacement and what that cost might be, and any other knock-on things that might come from that full replacement. The key thing is they are independent. They're the same people that will do surveys of properties before you buy them. And I'm sure if you've bought your own house, you've had a home buyer's survey done on that. And of course, if you bought rental property, investment property, I'm sure sometimes you've had surveys done of those. Those are also done by building surveyors, occasionally with a valuation slant on them as well, but they're predominantly being done by building surveyors who have got the expertise to know what to look at and give a report on what is the cause, what is the effect, and what is the longer-term remedy. And because these people are working independently for you, you can ask them questions. You can say to them, well, what is the quick fix? What will make the problem go away for another 12 months? Because I want to sell this property, or I know that within 12 months, I'm actually going to do a full refurbishment. All the tenants are going to move out, and I'm quite happy to deal with a roof repair, but let's do it as part of that full refurbishment in 12 months' time. So you can have these conversations with them. You can ask them, what's the quick fix? What's the Rolls Royce fix? What would you do if it was your property, Mr. Surveyor? Just ask these questions, and you will start to get clarity as to the best way forward with in your particular circumstance. And because they'll be able to give you some idea on budget, you can factor that in as well. You can also ask, well, what if I don't fix it? What's going to happen if I don't fix it? What's going to happen in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? They'll give you a view on that. Some defects with properties are not necessarily that critical that we need to jump on them in the next 24 hours. I would think a roof leak is more important, much more important, but there are other issues that you're going to come across with your properties that are perhaps less important in the grand scheme of things. So your building surveyors are those independent assessors that you can turn to and ask any questions to. I'm not a building surveyor. My background is actually quantity surveying. I'm not actually accredited with the RICS. I passed a degree in quantity surveying, but didn't choose to go on and do any more work with the RICS. And someone like me and other people within construction will often give you a really good view. I'm not particularly qualified to give it, but from experience, I can give you a good view. And that's why these questions get raised by members of my community on a regular basis. So I think there was 4 questions there that I've just gone through, just to give you a flavour of some questions that come up. I'd really encourage you to get in touch with me. Send me your own questions, and when I can next fit those in, I'll include those in a podcast like this. And of course, if it's a more major question, perhaps it's even content for a full podcast. So I'd be delighted to hear from you. In the show notes, there's details how you can find out more about being a member of my community. There's a lot of other benefits from being in the community, as well as being able to ask me questions on a regular basis. So do click on that link, and you're welcome to book a call with me to find out more about being in the community and getting regular, immediate support on the projects that you're getting involved with. Thanks very much for listening to me, and I look forward to catching up with you on another episode of the Refurbishment Mastery podcast.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please do like, share, and leave a comment where you can. If you need any guidance or advice with anything to do with your refurbishments or conversions, then don't hesitate to reach out. You can book a free call with me by clicking on the link at the top of my website, refurbishmentmastery.com. There's other ways you can contact me in the show notes as well. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.